Hello! I wanted to make a 15-20 minute video to follow up our introduction to business intelligence to introduce you to creating a business intelligence report using Microsoft Power BI. So, what is Microsoft Power BI? What are we going to be doing here? Well, Power BI is one of many self-service business intelligence tools. And the reason that we're using Power BI today, specifically the Power BI desktop, is because that happens to be what we have at Butler as part of our Office 365 subscription for all faculty and students. By all means, is Power BI the only option for using self-service business intelligence? It's not. There's many options out there, like the obviously popular Tableau. What I want to stress as we get into this is that the skills that we're going to talk about are transferable across platforms. Like what we talked about in the introductory video, the concept of business intelligence is greater than the programs that you use to create these business intelligence reports. Power BI just happens to be the tool that we have landed on at our facility. That doesn't mean that that's the only thing out there or that's even the best thing. It's a Coke versus Pepsi comparison. So we've got multiple files that we're going to work on today. We're going to splice those things together, setting up relationships and commonality in data using a Snowflake schema. We're then going to potentially create some joins, maybe use some DAX to create a calculated field, and then visualize this report at the end. So here's what we're going to do. Before I actually go into Power BI and show you how to set up the actual document, the Power BI report, let's just get familiar with the files that we're going to be working with. So here's what we've got. We have data that involve movie rentals. So think Redbox, or for those of you that are a little bit older, think Blockbuster, right? So any kind of a company that rents movies. So now the files that we're going to work with come from diverse sources. We've got a XML document that has contact information, right? And remember, one of the benefits of working in business intelligence is that you can open up multiple data sources and connect all those data sources. So here's our XML document that has all of our different contact information in it. So the first document is an XML document. We have a CSV, which is comma separated values, which is an additional kind of text file that has a database of all of our movies in it. And hey, just to give you a little look into the future, notice that these movies are not formatted correctly, right? Which is pretty common when you deal with older systems that maybe were all capital, for example, or all lowercase from the early 80s and the 90s. So we're going to have to fix this by shaping it when we go through that ETL process with Power BI, okay? Because you see that? Those are bad, okay? So we've got that. We have rate information, right? So our movie rates, our rental rates are based, here we go. Our movie rates are based on the membership types. You have 3 different types of memberships at our company you can pay for: gold, silver, bronze. Think of it like the different levels that you would pay for if you had a Netflix subscription, right? So you can have streaming, you can have 4K streaming, you can have DVDs through the mail if you're living in 2002, right? So you've got 3 different types of memberships, 3 different rates based on those memberships. Okay, that's another file that we're working with. And lastly, we have an Access database that has all of our transactional information in it, right? And this will actually be our fact table for this data model that we're building, okay? So transaction information. So our goal here is to splice all this together and come up with an actual report dashboard. Now, in order to do that, we're going to have to create a Power BI report. You could actually do a lot of this in Excel as well. Maybe we'll make another video that shows you how to use Power Pivot, for example, to do the same thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up the Power BI desktop. The Power BI desktop is a thick client development tool that you can use in conjunction with PowerBI.com, their cloud platform. The benefit of doing this is the entire Power BI ecosystem. So I can develop this report on my desktop, set the relationships, create any kind of DAX calculations I need to do, any kind of query joins that I need to do, and then I can share that to the Power BI cloud. When I share it to the Power BI cloud, I can then allow all the people in my organization that I would choose to access, to give access to this, the ability to interact with that dashboard live. So I create the dashboard, I create the data model structure, then they access that dashboard and pull from it or manipulate or pivot it, if you will, the way they want to do it. So the really big benefit here is price point in cloud ecosystem. Can you do this with other programs? Absolutely. But it integrates pretty well with their cloud structure. And the desktop is also free. You don't have to pay for the desktop, but you do have to have a Power BI account, which I've already logged into. Okay. So what are we going to do here? First of all, if you are getting into this and you've not installed any of the software, know that the Power BI desktop application is Windows only. There is no version of this for the Mac. So if you're a Butler student, you're going to need to use BU Anywhere, which already has this software installed on it. And if you don't know how BU Anywhere works, I've actually got a video already on the YouTube channel on how to access BU Anywhere. You'll just follow that video, use your Butler username and password to log into BU Anywhere, the labs build, as well as that same username and password that allows you, just like up here, to log into Power BI, the desktop, and the cloud. Okay? So there's a different video for that if you need help. If you're on a PC and you would like to have Power BI Desktop on your personal computer, my suggestion is actually doing it through the Microsoft App Store. Okay, so what you'd want to do is jump in to your Windows menu and go to Microsoft Store right here. And from Microsoft Store, do a search for Power BI. And see, I've already got it, but if I didn't already have it, I would be able to actually download this onto my system. So now there's two ways to do this. You can download it using the Microsoft Store, or you can download it just by going to powerbi.com. Now, the reason I'm suggesting you upload it or you install it using the Microsoft Store is because it will automatically do updates every time Microsoft updates the platform, and they update it a lot. If you use the download from Microsoft.com, you'll have to manually download updates every time they do it. So it's really beneficial to do it this way. It takes about the same amount of time, and by installing this, you get automatic updates. You don't have to pay for them. It makes it really, really easy. So back to Power BI. What are we going to do? So there's two different ways we can approach this. We can just jump right in when you first launch the program, and it gives you this little start menu, and you can go over to get data and start connecting to your data. If you already have the platform open like this, we can go to File, we can go to New, and it's going to just start all over again. And it's going to create that report, slowly but surely. There we go. So remember, if you think back to when we started talking about just the concept of business intelligence, there's sort of a mantra that they use, at least at Microsoft, which is connect, transform, share. And if you think of that diagram that I showed you of those multiple data sources, the ETL process into the data warehouse, into OLAP, into your final report, that can really be summarized as connect, transform, share. So when you're working with Power BI Desktop, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to start connecting to your data sources and transforming them as they come into your data model. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click Get Data, right, which is what I just did, and it's going to open up this menu that gives me the option of pulling data from about 1 million different sources. If you can think of a source that can store data, you can pretty much use that source to connect with Power BI. So all we're going to do is we're just going to work our way through connecting to these data sources and adding them to our data model before we go through and try to visualize right at the very end, which is sort of the big picture part of working in Power BI. So what we're going to do here is we are going to connect to our XML file first. So I'm going to go XML Connect. And I already had it kind of pointing to the file that contains that XML document, but for you guys, you may need to navigate to it. Know that if it were a database or an external source, you can use credentials to log in if you need to. It just depends on what source you're connecting to. For me, this time it's pretty simple. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my contacts, XML file. I'm going to click Open. and I'm going to connect to that data source. Now, you don't ever just want to blindly trust that source. You want to look at the table that you're importing and then decide, hey, do I need to transform this? Do I need to shape this data in some way, or can I just directly connect to it? So now I'm going to click here to make sure that that table is selected. And when I look at it, you know what? That actually looks pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and load this. Now, when I click load, it's going to add it to the data model of the report. If I didn't like it, I would click transform, which would open Power Query, which we've discussed, and that would give me the ability to shape that data or transform that in some way, which we will do for another connection in a moment. So we're going to go ahead and click load, and that's going to load this to the data model. Now, what do you see when you're inside the Power BI desktop environment? So you've got three different areas that you're going to work in, and they kind of go in reverse order. So right here, you have your data model, okay? From the data model, you've got your data view, and then from your data view, you've got your report. Okay, your report is the visualized dashboard. Now, if you watched the business intelligence introduction, which I hope that you did, you'll remember me saying that 90% of your efforts will end up going into the data model, connecting to your sources, transforming your data, setting up your DAX, creating joins, creating queries as you need to, and then the last 10% will go into this, your report. So for most of our talk today, we're going to work in our data model, we're going to work in our data view. So when I click my data model, you see I've actually brought that table in, just like if you were working in SQL. So now you see a data table here, and you see the corresponding fields in that table. Now that's good. We don't need to do anything to create relationships yet because we haven't brought in any more additional sources. But we have several to bring in. So we're going to do that. So we're going to go back to get data again, and this time we're going to go down to more, and we're going to bring in that CSV file that we have. Right? So we're just going to go to CSV, and we're going to go to connect. And the CSV that we're going to choose, we're going to actually choose this one that's our movies file. So think of that like inventory. We're going to click open. We're going to take a look at it. Oh my. Now this one's different. So when we view the CSV in preview mode, we notice that the movie titles don't look good. This is bad, right? They're incorrectly formatted. So much like baking a cake, you wouldn't want to add an ingredient to a cake that is bad. When you're building a data model to go into a business intelligence report, you wouldn't want to connect to data and add that data if it's bad. Now, sometimes you have the ability to go back to your data source and change it at the source. Maybe you can, maybe you can't. Sometimes you have to. But most of your situations can be corrected at the query level, meaning that you're just changing it when you connect to it during the actual query process, not editing your original data source. So what we're doing here is going to not impact the original source file. If you were to go back to the CSV and open that original source file, the data would look exactly the same. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump over here. We're going to go transform. And it's going to open up the PQE. PQE stands for Power Query Editor. And I'll say that PQE pretty much the rest of this little talk here just because Power Query Editor is a mouthful. But know that when you're in the PQE, everything you do is non-destructive. So all these edits that I do, all these transformations, they'll show up over here in applied steps. And at any given time, if I don't like what I've done, I can just hit the X and it's going to undo it because the original source file is not changing. So one thing that people ask about is what language does Power Query use? It actually uses a language called Mashup or just M. If you were to ask me, just personally, I would say that Mashup looks a lot like a combination of SQL and Visual Basic, but you'll see that start to appear up here in the formula bar as we go through and make these transformations. So I'm going to go ahead and click Movie Title because that doesn't look good to me. So from there, I'm going to go to the Transform tab in the ribbon of the PQE. I'm going to go over to Format, and I'm going to go to capitalize each word. But notice we've got several options in here. And the options that you see, lowercase, uppercase, capital, trim, and clean, are all pretty useful. Lowercase, you could probably guess what that does. Uppercase, same. Capitalize each word, same. But trim and clean are actually pretty handy when you're working with words. What trim does is it's going to eliminate any extra spaces that might be floating around inside each one of those records. And what clean does is it'll remove any characters that would be considered invalid from your data. So in general, when you're working with words, it's a good business process or just a best practice to trim and clean your data as you see fit. Now I'm going to go ahead and go capitalize each word, and I can go trim and clean if I like. And it applies to all those things all in one shot. Okay, so once I look at my data, I review it, and I decide, ooh, okay, this looks the way that I want it to look. I'm going to go home. I'm going to go to close and apply. I'm going to click close and apply. And now you'll see in just a moment, woo, all right, we've got two things, two table objects inside our data model. Now, there is no direct relationship between movies and accounts. Okay, there is no direct relationship here. So we're not going to create one yet. We're going to just keep connecting to our data sources. So right now, these are two independent tables. No relationship to be made. So we're going to go back to connect again. We're going to go to more. So I went to get data, more. And this time I want to connect, let's see what's left, to the Excel file. The Excel file has our movie rates. So I'm going to go to rates, open. I'm going to click our rates here. I take a quick look. That looks pretty good. So we're going to load. Alrighty. Now you notice that by default, it just created a relationship. It seems to think that, hey, there's a relationship between account and type, between type in the account table and type in the rates table. And in this particular case, it actually is correct that there is one here. But I'm actually going to delete this relationship because I think it would be beneficial to see what it looks like to make your own relationships, which that was correct. It auto-detected a relationship here. But I also want to talk to you about schemas when creating these data models. So we're going to delete that for just a second, and I'll come back and we'll recreate it and talk about data schemas in a minute. So our next step is we're going to go back to get data, and we're going to grab our last file, which is our access database. I've got two files here. One's got some additional data that we're going to look at. So we're going to choose the beta file. I go to transactions. And I'm going to take a look. Okay, we've got some problems again that we may need to fix. So when I look at the date, it has not recorded the time that goes along with it. So we don't like that because everything's 12 a.m. So that's bad. So what we're going to do is we're going to transform this data. Once we get into this data, we're going to go ahead and click our column for data, or excuse me, for date, and we're going to jump over to date type, data type, and we're just going to choose date instead of date and time. Alrighty, and we're going to click close and apply. Okie dokie. So from here, now it's our time to start considering data schemas because we've got four sources of relational data here, right? We've got our account information, our inventory information, our movie rates, and our transactions. So we've got several different data sources here. And what we need to start thinking about is what's the commonality between them? Where are their relationships? Where are their common fields, right? And this is where your understanding of primary and foreign keys and relationships within databases matter, because this is really the exact same way that you would do this if you were using Access, excuse me, or another database. So when you're dealing with data schemas, you have something called dimension tables and you have something called fact tables. This transactions table is your fact table, and an easy way to think of it is it's all the records that you're actually paying attention to from a transactional standpoint, right? These are your, think of it like a little mantra, these are all of your facts. This is your bottom line. Fact tables are fed by dimension tables, right? So a dimension of this fact table has information coming from over here. So for example, the account is just one aspect of the transactions table being fed by the account information of the account table. So this is a dimension of this, which would make this a dimension table. Now, when you set this up, there are two pretty common schemas that you'll see. One is called the star schema, and one is called the snowflake schema when you go through and design your architecture of this data model. So in this particular case, let's just start and see what happens, and we'll see if this is star or snowflake. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at account, and I'm going to say, hey, this account number, this account field, is the same account field that appears in transactions, right? This and this are the same. That's the relationships, that's the common field. In a data table that is just documenting customer accounts, account number would be the primary key. As you guys know, primary keys cannot repeat. Primary keys cannot be null, aka blank. All right. So if you had an account, it would appear one time in the account table, but you could rent as many movies as you want, making this a one-to-many relationship through the common field, which is also a foreign key of account. So I'm going to grab account. I'm just going to go over here and drag it down like this. It's going to evaluate it, and you'll see that it's a one-to-many relationship. So that is correct. So now based on that, that same concept applies to inventory here with serial number, right? Every individualized serial number inside for a movie is going to be inside this table. It's only going to appear once per serial number per movie, but that movie can be rented many times, right? So I'm going to grab this, and I'm going to pull it down to serial number, and now we're cooking. Uh-oh. Oh, very good. So we do have a problem here, and this will be something that we can fix. So this is a pretty good example of something that can go wrong. And what you'll see here is it's saying that when it evaluates the this particular file, that the one-to-many relationship that we're hoping for doesn't exist. It's a many-to-many relationship. Now, the reason that's happening is there's actually in this movie file over here, the data is repeating, which is bad, right? Remember, primary keys cannot repeat. Primary keys cannot be null. So, instead of scrapping this entire thing and saying, oh boy, we got to go back to the drawing board, we don't have to do that. We can fix this file by going back into our query. So I'm going to go to data view, and I'm going to go over to movies, and we're just going to evaluate, figure out what's going on. So here's all my movies, and if I look at the bottom, uh-oh, these movies are repeating. And this isn't a bad, this is a bad thing for our data model, but this is not the end of the world. This is the beauty of Power Query, right? So if we look at this and decide, oh man, our data is bad, you know what we're going to do? We're going to go back in. So we're going to go to transform data again. And when we go to transform data, we have all of the data tables that we've connected to. So I'm going to click movies, and I see these files, and I have the ability to go through and delete whatever I don't want. So I can just literally go in and delete whatever record I want. So if I go remove, and let's see how many there are here. So I'll show you a little shortcut. There are 2, 3, 4. There's 13 repeating records, right? So what I can do is go to remove rows. And if I choose remove bottom rows, it's going to ask me, how many rows do you want to remove? Well, did you see the 13 files, the 13 rows at the bottom are repeating? So I'm going to say 13. And when I do that, boom, look at that. Those repeating records that were causing it to be a many-to-many instead of a one-to-many relationship are gone. Now, remember, they're not truly gone from the original data source. So if I were to open up this Excel file, it would still be there. And this is a CSV. If I were to open up the CSV, it would still be there. It's not truly gone. But if I click remove right here from the applied steps, back they come because they were never really deleted from the original file. So we're going to go back to remove again, remove bottom rows, 13. Now we're looking good, right? So things are good. So now we're going to click close and apply, and we're going to go back to our data model again. So we're going to leave report or data view. We're going to go back, and we're going to try to make that exact same connection again. So we'll go serial to serial, and when I do that, oh yeah, it has evaluated as a one-to-many relationship instead of a many-to-many relationship, which isn't necessarily a good thing, right? So that means that the common field is repeating multiple times across multiple tables. A lot of times that means your data could be better normalized than it is. So we avoid that when we can. So I'm going to take this table, move it to the side, and let's talk schemas for a second. So the two common schemas that you'll see when you're working in BI, and it doesn't matter what BI platform you're working in, they're going to be star schema and snowflake schema. So if I don't do anything with this down here, these rates down here, what you're going to get is a star schema. And think of a star like if you were drawing a star on a piece of paper. So like a little circle with, little arms coming off the side, right? So I've got the fact table in the middle and the dimension tables on the outside. Thus, that would make it a star schema. If I had additional fact tables or dimension tables, so for example down here, if this was directly connected to the dimension table or to the fact table, so dimension to fact, it would just be a star going around, okay? Now that's not what's going to happen here though, because this table right here is a dimension table as well. But this dimension table is actually feeding another dimension table. So when that happens, that is a different kind of schema that you've configured, right? So this dimension table, instead of it going directly to a fact table, is a dimension table going to another dimension table. So boom, boom, right? So type to type, which we can actually do. Okay. So in this particular example, this is considered a snowflake schema. Now, it doesn't really look like a snowflake per se, but an easy way to keep track of it is when you have a dimension table that's feeding another dimension table, that's a snowflake schema versus a star schema. So now the good news here is that the beginning of our work is done. We've built a data model. So we've connected to our data sources. We've cleaned our data sources. We've made as many transformations as we need to. And at this point, voila, hey, we've built our data model. So that's good. So now the next thing we could do, now we could conceivably start dashboarding right now. But before we do, we're going to add some transformations using some, or not transformations, we're going to add some calculations using something called DAX, Data Analysis Expressions. So we're going to jump from data model view to data view. And one of the things you're going to see here is when we look at transactions, we actually don't have anything that tells us how much money we've made. So there's really nothing in here that actually tells us that yet. So what we could do if we wanted is we could go through and do some lookups, do some calculations, do something that would allow us to add records or calculate things that would tell us per transaction how much we've made. So what I'm going to do here is, to keep the length of this video down, is I'm going to stop it here with the creation of the data model. And in our next video, we're going to talk about how to use a little bit of DAX. So we'll touch on DAX a little bit, and then we'll talk on dashboards a little bit. So for now, what I'll do is I suggest you save your work and take a little break and come back and check out part 2 of Intro into Power BI, which will talk to you about working in data model or working in data sheet view, introduction to DAX, and dashboarding. All right, that's it for now.